My name is Faith Nelson, and at 32, I thought I understood the unspoken rules of hospital politics. As a charge nurse in the cardiac telemetry unit at Silver Lake Hospital in Mirror Heights, Colorado, I'd navigated 5 years of 12-hour shifts, code blues, and the delicate balance between patient advocacy and administrative compliance. The Rocky Mountains framed our windows, their snow-capped peaks a constant reminder that some things remained unchanging, even when everything else felt unstable. Silver Lake Hospital prided itself on being a beacon of healthcare excellence in our mountain community. The gleaming floors, state-of-the-art Epic electronic health record system, and carefully curated patient satisfaction scores painted a picture of institutional integrity. But hospitals, like people, can harbor secrets beneath polished surfaces. The first sign something was wrong came during a routine staff meeting in late September. Catherine Rivera, our nursing director, stood at the front of the conference room, her usual composed demeanor slightly strained as she discussed new safety protocols. Her words were measured, professional, but her eyes kept darting to specific faces around the table, mine included. When she mentioned increased scrutiny from regulatory bodies, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "We need to ensure all documentation is pristine," Catherine emphasized, her fingers drumming against the podium. "Any discrepancies, no matter how minor, could trigger investigations that none of us want to endure." I'd worked under Catherine for 3 years. She'd been my mentor, my advocate, the person who defended my clinical judgment when Dr. Sebastian Martinez questioned my decision to hold a patient's beta blocker due to borderline hypotension. She'd stood firm, backing my assessment with unwavering confidence. That support had meant everything to a relatively new charge nurse, trying to establish credibility in a competitive environment. But lately, something felt different. Catherine's usual warmth had been replaced by a professional distance that left me questioning interactions I had previously taken for granted. She'd begun requesting detailed explanations for routine decisions, asking for documentation that seemed excessive even by our hospital's meticulous standards. The second sign came 2 weeks later, during shift change. I was reviewing patient assignments with the incoming night nurse when I noticed Catherine observing from the nurse's station, her attention focused intently on my handoff report. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, but not before I caught something unsettling in her expression. Calculation, perhaps, or assessment. "Everything okay?" asked Sebastian Chen, one of our most experienced night nurses, following my gaze. "Just tired," I replied, but the unease lingered long after I'd clocked out. The third sign was the most troubling. While updating a patient's care plan in Epic, I discovered that several of my previous entries had been flagged for review. The notifications appeared without explanation, marked only with Catherine's electronic signature and a timestamp from the previous evening. When I approached her about it the next morning, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "Quality assurance," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing to worry about, just routine auditing." But routine auditing didn't typically target one nurse's documentation with such precision. Routine auditing didn't leave a charge nurse feeling like she was being watched, evaluated, and found wanting in ways she couldn't understand. The atmosphere in our unit began to shift. Conversations quieted when I approached. Colleagues who'd previously sought my input on complex cases started consulting others instead. Even the unit secretary, usually chatty and warm, became professionally cordial but distant. I tried to rationalize the changes. Hospital environments were naturally stressful. Budget cuts and regulatory pressures affected everyone. Perhaps I was reading too much into normal workplace fluctuations. But deep down, in the part of my mind that had learned to trust clinical instincts over comfortable explanations, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The question wasn't whether trouble was coming, it was when it would arrive, and whether I'd be prepared to face whatever Catherine Rivera was planning. The answer came on a Tuesday morning in October, when I arrived for my shift to find an envelope waiting in my mailbox, marked confidential and bearing the hospital's human resources letterhead. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open, my hand steadier than my pulse. Inside was a formal notice requesting my presence at a meeting with Human Resources at 2 o'clock that afternoon. The subject line read, "Workplace Safety Compliance Review." My stomach dropped. In 12 years of nursing, I'd never been called to HR for safety violations. My record was spotless. Commendations for excellence, perfect attendance awards, and not a single incident report with my name attached as anything other than a witness or reporter. I thought back to my relationship with Catherine Rivera, trying to understand how we'd arrived at this moment. When she'd been promoted to nursing director 18 months ago, I'd been genuinely happy for her. Catherine had worked her way up from staff nurse to charge nurse to assistant director, earning respect through competence and what seemed like genuine care for both patients and staff. Our professional relationship had deepened 6 months into her tenure when Dr. Marcus Webb, a notoriously difficult cardiologist, had publicly questioned my clinical judgment during rounds. I'd recommended increasing monitoring frequency for a post-operative patient showing subtle signs of complications, changes in skin color, and slight alterations in vital signs that weren't yet alarming but concerned me nonetheless. Nurse Nelson, Dr. Webb had said, his voice carrying that particular condescension some physicians reserved for nursing staff. I think you're being overly cautious. The patient's parameters are within normal limits. Before I could respond, Catherine had stepped forward. Dr. Webb, Faith has 15 years of cardiac experience and one of the lowest readmission rates in the unit. If she's concerned about a patient, we take that seriously. She'd been right to defend me. The patient had indeed developed complications 12 hours later. Nothing life-threatening, but significant enough to require intervention that might have been delayed without the increased monitoring I'd recommended. After that incident, Catherine had made a point of publicly supporting my clinical decisions. She'd included me in quality improvement initiatives, sought my input on staffing decisions, and even recommended me for a leadership development program. I'd felt valued, respected, and professionally secure in ways I hadn't experienced under previous directors. That's what made the current situation so bewildering. The Catherine who'd defended my expertise seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who watched me with calculating eyes and questioned my documentation with increasing frequency. The morning dragged by with unusual tension. During report, I noticed Sebastian Chen glancing at me with what looked like sympathy, though he said nothing. Diana Martinez, usually quick with a joke or encouraging word, seemed subdued. Even the unit's atmosphere felt different. Conversations more muted, interactions more formal. At lunch, I sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a salad while reviewing the past few weeks for any incident that might have triggered a safety review. I'd followed all protocols, documented thoroughly, and maintained the same high standards that had earned me recognition throughout my career. The only unusual element had been Catherine's increased scrutiny of my work. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Catherine wasn't investigating safety violations. She was creating them. Or, at least, she was creating the appearance of them. I thought about the flagged documentation entries, the mysterious quality assurance reviews, the way she'd been observing my interactions with patients and families. She'd been building a case, collecting evidence for something I couldn't yet understand. At 1:45, I made my way to the administrative wing, my badge beeping against the card reader with unusual loudness. The HR office was located in a section of the hospital I rarely visited. All beige walls and corporate motivational posters that felt disconnected from the clinical reality of patient care. Margaret Thompson, the HR director, greeted me with professional courtesy but no warmth. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of neutral expression that revealed nothing about her thoughts or intentions. "Please, have a seat, Faith," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I appreciate you coming in on such short notice." Catherine entered the room moments later, carrying a thick folder that she placed on Margaret's desk with deliberate precision. She avoided making eye contact with me, instead focusing on arranging papers with unnecessary attention to detail. "Faith," Margaret began, opening the folder, "we've received some concerning reports about potential workplace safety violations in your unit. Catherine has documented several incidents that require our attention." My mouth went dry. What kind of incidents? Catherine finally looked at me, her expression professionally neutral but somehow triumphant. Failure to follow proper isolation protocols, inadequate hand hygiene compliance, and improper handling of hazardous materials. Each accusation hit like a slap. I'd been meticulous about infection control throughout my career, especially given the increased awareness following recent healthcare challenges. The idea that I'd violated basic safety protocols was not just false. It was professionally devastating. "I'd like to see the documentation," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Margaret slid several papers across the desk. As I read through them, my confusion deepened into something approaching horror. The reports described incidents I didn't remember, violations I'd never committed, and patterns of behavior that bore no resemblance to my actual practice. According to Catherine's documentation, I'd entered isolation rooms without proper PPE on 3 separate occasions. I'd allegedly failed to perform hand hygiene between patient contacts multiple times. Most damaging of all, she'd reported that I'd improperly disposed of chemotherapy materials, creating potential exposure risks for other staff members. These incidents never happened, I said, looking directly at Catherine. You know they never happened. Catherine's expression didn't change. I understand this is difficult to hear, Faith, but patient safety is our primary concern. I've documented what I've observed, following proper reporting protocols. When did these alleged incidents occur? I asked, studying the dates on the reports. Margaret consulted the folder. Over the past 6 weeks, according to Catherine's documentation. 6 weeks. Exactly the period when Catherine had been watching me more closely, when she'd been flagging my documentation, when the atmosphere in our unit had begun to shift. She'd been planning this systematically, building a case designed to destroy my career and reputation. I want to review the security footage, I said. If these incidents occurred as described, they'll be captured on the unit's surveillance cameras. For the first time, Catherine's composure flickered slightly. The cameras don't cover all areas of the unit, and the footage is only retained for 30 days. Then let's review what's available, I pressed. I'm confident it will show that these allegations are false. Margaret made a note in the file. We'll certainly investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, Faith, I'm afraid we need to place you on administrative leave pending the completion of our review. The words hit me like a physical blow. Administrative leave meant suspension without the stigma of termination, but the professional implications were nearly as severe. Word would spread through the hospital within hours. My colleagues would wonder what I'd done wrong. My reputation, built over 15 years of dedicated service, would be tainted by suspicion and doubt. This is retaliation, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Catherine has been targeting me for weeks, and now she's fabricating safety violations to justify removing me from my position. That's a serious accusation, Margaret said, her tone carefully neutral. Do you have evidence to support that claim? I thought about the flag documentation, the increased scrutiny, the way Catherine had been watching me. All of it could be explained as legitimate supervisory oversight. She'd been careful, methodical in her approach. I want union representation, I said finally. Of course, Margaret replied. You have every right to involve your union representative in this process. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting once you've had time to consult with them. As I left the HR office, my badge felt heavy against my scrubs. I had 48 hours to figure out why Catherine Rivera was trying to destroy my career, and more importantly, how to prove that her allegations were fabricated lies designed to remove me from a position I'd earned through years of dedicated service. The betrayal cut deeper than professional disappointment. Catherine had been someone I'd trusted, respected, and considered a mentor. She'd defended me when others questioned my judgment, supported my professional development, and made me believe that excellence and integrity were valued in our workplace. Now I understood that her support had been strategic, designed to make the eventual betrayal more devastating. She'd built me up only to tear me down, and I had no idea why. Walking back toward the unit to collect my personal belongings, I passed Sebastian Chen in the hallway. He glanced around to ensure we weren't being observed, then stepped closer. Faith, he said quietly, whatever's happening, some of us know it's not right. Don't give up. His words offered a small measure of comfort, but they couldn't change the reality of my situation. I was suspended, under investigation, and facing accusations that could end my nursing career permanently. The question wasn't whether I could survive Catherine's betrayal. It was whether I could prove it was a betrayal at all. The union representative, Diana Martinez, arrived at Silver Lake Hospital the next morning with a briefcase full of documentation and 20 years of experience defending healthcare workers. She was a former ICU nurse herself, which meant she understood both the clinical realities and the political undercurrents that could destroy careers. I've reviewed your personnel file, Diana said, as we sat in a small conference room near the hospital's main entrance. Your performance evaluations are exemplary. No prior disciplinary actions, multiple commendations, and consistent positive feedback from physicians and colleagues. Then why is this happening? I asked, though I suspected the answer had nothing to do with my actual performance. That's what we're going to find out, Diana replied. But first, I need you to walk me through every interaction you've had with Catherine Rivera over the past 6 months. Every conversation, every email, every moment when something felt off. For the next 2 hours, I reconstructed the timeline of Catherine's behavior. The increased scrutiny that began after the physician questioned my clinical judgment. The way she'd started appearing during my shifts more frequently. The subtle changes in her tone during our conversations. The flag documentation that seemed to target specific aspects of my practice. She's been building a case, Diana said, making notes on her legal pad. This wasn't a spontaneous decision to report you. This was calculated, methodical preparation for your removal. But why? The question had been haunting me since my suspension. I've never done anything to threaten her position or challenge her authority. Diana looked up from her notes. Sometimes the threat isn't what you've done. It's what you represent. Your competence, your integrity, your potential for advancement. Some people see excellence in others as a personal attack on their own mediocrity. The formal investigation meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I was barred from entering patient care areas, though I could access the hospital for administrative purposes. The isolation was deliberate and demoralizing, a reminder that my professional identity had been stripped away pending the outcome of Catherine's accusations. Sebastian Chen found me in the hospital cafeteria on Thursday afternoon. I'd been reviewing my own documentation, searching for any legitimate basis for Catherine's safety violation claims. This is insane, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Everyone on the unit knows you're one of the most careful nurses we have. Your medication administration is flawless, your infection control practices are textbook perfect, and you've never had a single incident report filed against you. Catherine claims otherwise, I said, showing him the formal complaint. According to this, I've been consistently violating multiple safety protocols, creating dangerous situations for patients and staff. Sebastian read through the document, his expression growing more incredulous with each allegation. This is fiction, he said finally. Pure fiction, and I can prove it. What do you mean? The incident she's citing from last month, the one where she claims you failed to follow proper isolation procedures? I was working that shift. I saw the entire interaction. You followed protocol perfectly, and I documented it in my own notes because the patient's family had questions about the precautions. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since my suspension. Would you be willing to testify to that? Absolutely, Sebastian said. And there's more. Catherine's been asking other nurses about your practices, fishing for complaints or concerns. When people told her you were exemplary, she seemed frustrated. Amanda Torres mentioned that Catherine specifically asked her to, quote, keep an eye on Faith's documentation and report any irregularities. The picture was becoming clearer. Catherine hadn't just fabricated the safety violations. She'd actively tried to recruit other staff members to support her false narrative. When that failed, she proceeded with her accusations anyway, relying on her position of authority to make them credible. Diana Martinez was pleased when I shared Sebastian's information. Witness testimony from a colleague who was present during the alleged violations is exactly what we need, she said. But we need more than one person's word against a nursing director's. What about the documentation Catherine claims is problematic? I asked. Surely the investigation will show that my charting meets all standards. That's where things get complicated, Diana replied. Catherine has administrative access to the electronic health record system. She can review documentation patterns, flag entries for review, and potentially modify certain administrative notes. If she's been planning this for months, she may have created a paper trail that supports her allegations. The possibility that Catherine had manipulated my electronic documentation felt like a violation beyond the false accusations. The integrity of patient records was sacred in healthcare. Tampering with them crossed every ethical and legal boundary that governed our profession. Can we prove if she's altered anything? I asked. Epic maintains audit trails for all system access and modifications, Diana explained. But getting access to those logs requires either cooperation from hospital administration or a formal legal discovery process. Neither is guaranteed. The investigation meeting took place the following Tuesday in the hospital's executive conference room. Present were Margaret Chen from HR, Dr. Patricia Williams, the chief medical officer, Catherine Rivera, Diana Martinez, and myself. The formal atmosphere felt more like a criminal trial than an internal workplace review. Catherine presented her case with the same methodical precision she'd used to build it. She had printed documentation, witness statements from 2 nurses I barely knew, and a timeline of alleged safety violations spanning 3 months. Her presentation was professional, detailed, and completely fabricated. Ms. Nelson's pattern of behavior represents a clear threat to patient safety, Catherine concluded. Despite multiple informal conversations about these concerns, the violations have continued. I have no choice but to recommend immediate termination. Diana Martinez responded with equal professionalism, presenting Sebastian's witness testimony, my exemplary performance reviews, and a detailed analysis of my actual documentation practices. She challenged each of Catherine's allegations with specific evidence and pointed out the suspicious timing of the complaints. It's notable, Diana said, that these alleged safety violations were never reported through proper channels when they supposedly occurred. No incident reports were filed, no immediate supervisory interventions were documented, and no corrective action plans were implemented. This suggests either gross negligence in supervisory responsibilities or fabricated allegations designed to justify predetermined disciplinary action. Dr. Williams asked pointed questions about the documentation Catherine had flagged. When pressed for specific examples, Catherine's responses became vague and defensive. She couldn't explain why she hadn't followed standard protocols for addressing safety concerns in real time. I'll need to review all the evidence before making a determination. Drive, Williams said finally. This meeting is adjourned pending further investigation. As we filed out of the conference room, Catherine avoided eye contact. For the first time since this ordeal began, she looked uncertain, perhaps realizing that her carefully constructed case had significant holes. Sebastian was waiting in the lobby when I emerged from the meeting. How did it go? He asked. Better than expected, I replied, but it's not over yet. It will be soon, he said with quiet confidence. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially when people like Catherine get overconfident about their ability to manipulate it. That evening, Diana called with unexpected news. Dr. Williams has ordered a comprehensive audit of all documentation access logs for your patient records over the past 6 months, she said. If Catherine has been tampering with anything, we'll know within 48 hours. The audit results arrived on Thursday morning. Catherine Rivera had accessed my patient documentation 127 times, outside of normal supervisory review patterns. She'd made 17 administrative modifications to nursing notes, all of which had been flagged in her complaint against me. Most damning of all, she'd accessed the records during off-shift hours when she wasn't even scheduled to work. Dr. Williams called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. This time, Catherine arrived with her own legal representation, a clear indication that she understood the gravity of her situation. Ms. Rivera, Dr. Williams began, can you explain why you accessed Faith Nelson's patient documentation 127 times over a 3-month period, including 17 instances where you made administrative modifications? Catherine's attorney whispered something in her ear before she responded. I was conducting routine supervisory oversight of a nurse whose performance had raised concerns. Routine oversight doesn't typically involve modifying documentation after the fact, Dr. Williams replied, nor does it require accessing records during off-shift hours from your home computer. The evidence was overwhelming. Catherine had systematically altered my documentation to create the appearance of safety violations, then used those fabricated violations to justify my suspension and recommended termination. It was fraud, pure and simple. Effective immediately, Dr. Williams announced. Catherine Rivera is suspended, pending a full investigation into documentation tampering and falsification of employee records. Faith Nelson is reinstated to her position with full back pay and benefits. Catherine's face went pale as the reality of her situation sank in. Her attempt to destroy my career had instead exposed her own criminal behavior. The betrayal she'd orchestrated had become her own professional death sentence. As we left the conference room, Catherine finally looked at me directly. There was no remorse in her eyes, only anger at being caught. She'd gambled everything on her ability to manipulate the system, and she'd lost. The silence in the hallway felt different now, not oppressive, but cleansing. Justice had been served, and the truth had finally emerged from the shadows where Catherine had tried to bury it.